Hello friends, my name is Alchemy. Welcome to the channel. Today, you and I are going to be talking about samplers. Now, there are a ton of them out there. There is a lot of reasons to, look into different ones and whatnot. And today I actually kind of want to educate you all on some of my favorites, but also talk about and ask the question of why we don't have like a super sampler. And what do I mean by that? Well, the annoying thing about most samplers is that they all have a really cool feature and then they're missing like very basic features that drive me crazy. So, for example, something that I think a lot of people are pretty familiar with is something like Serato Sample, which is really cool because it will find chops for you. You can pitch each of the samples and, do something interesting. And one of the recent updates that they came out with was being able to separate stems. And that's really cool. Now, one of the issues that I have with this is that it does not have the ability to change in between warp modes. And that's something that drives me crazy because if you are familiar with something like the Bitwig sampler, which can change between repitch cycles and textures, then you can kind of modify the warp modes that these have and change them from something like granular to wavetable and back and forth. Now, then you might be like, well, why don't you just use something like the Bitwig sampler? And that's because A, it doesn't have a built-in slicer, and B, you have to re-trigger a MIDI note in order for this to change, which is sometimes frustrating. The other thing is that while this does have the warp modes and stuff, there's some other features that are missing from the sampler, say like Ableton's built-in regular sampler, which is pretty cool, that can do things like FM. So if I go here over to the pitch oscillator, we can actually apply different waveforms of FM to whatever signal that we have, right? And so if I were to start adding some stuff, I need to, forgive me, it's been a while. Oh, here we go. Which, that's freaking awesome. And this is one of the only samplers that I know of that can do this other than something like Faceplant, which Faceplant is awesome because you have all different kinds of granular modes in here, and you can also do like really crazy stuff like FM, a granular sampler from like Wavetable or something, which is absolutely crazy. But like I said before, this doesn't have a built-in slicer, and you can only use the granular sampler within the granular mode, and you can only use the respective sampler within that. And so something that I would like to see is something that kind of does everything. And this would be just kind of like from a basic functionality, but from the things that we've seen from before, which is part of the frustrating part, is like the technology is there. Maybe everybody can combine their powers and create some kind of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. What is it called? Something Megazord or whatever. Is something like Life. I value this plugin a lot because there is a synergy with utilizing the phone app. So what it can do is record up to 15 seconds of whatever it is that you have through your phone and upload it to a cloud, which I'll have a new video coming out with this soon at some point of how to sample from the internet and utilize this for really cool chops, which I think that you all will enjoy. But the problem with this is that you can only record up to 15 seconds. And while I love the sequencer that you have, there's some very basic functions that you can't do, like reverse a sample. um, and it's just kind of like, what? It also kind of stinks that you don't have more than 15 seconds to work with. And oddly enough, this also does not have a built-in clipper. And maybe you might be saying that I'm pedantic, but yeah, you might consider something like XO instead, where it does have a built-in clipper, and the benefit of this is that this actually goes through your entire sample library and can find all of your kicks and snares and all that and place them into a kit where it has a very basic sequencer. But just like Life, the sequencers on here don't have the micro timing built in. You have nudge, but it will nudge the entire thing. You can swing these, but it's not the same kind of control that you would normally have. However, this does have a built-in clipper, and then you do have some basic functionality with the samples that you have respectively. So I mean, you can kind of like see where I'm going with this, but you'll find that like every sampler in one end is kind of cool, and that's what makes it unique. And maybe some people are like, yo, um, this is a good thing because there's diversity and whatnot, but I'm still kind of surprised that there's not like a phase plant-esque type thing of a sampler that can kind of utilize all these functions to the full ability. And maybe it's too much DSP, maybe it would be too much processing or whatever, but I would think that when you're working with audio, it wouldn't be necessarily that big of a deal. But imagine if you had something that would not only act as a slicer, but you could change the warp mode of this, but you could also, utilize a AI functionality to toss stuff into whatever this is, because I mean, for this is AI anyways, but you have this super kind of a hybrid of something that would be like a sampler slash sequencer altogether. But there's more. So within this, these are kind of like the favorite things that I use. There is, of course, the rolling sampler, which stays on the master channel of everything I use, which anytime I make a sound, this will record, and then I can take a piece of it out and just put it there, which, by the way, out of everything, this is the best 20 bucks you'll ever spend. Out of all of these, even Faceplant, this to me is like the must own. Somebody please develop this for iOS. I beg of you. That would be lovely. So even within Ableton, one thing that they did that is pretty sick is the simpler, which kind of gives you a lot of controls that are similar. For one, you can change the warp modes here between all of them. You can't automate them, which kind of sucks. And then also you have to transposition or transpose the entire loop in order for you to change this. So you can't transposition or transpose this sound to this sound and this sound and this sound and this sound. And so it's just kind of like, what? Why doesn't this exist? Yeah, it's just kind of strange. But that's not all. There are more samplers. And we're going to hop over to the iPad now to look at some other options of different cool things that you can do. And we've got 3 more to talk about, so I'm not going to make this video too long, but I don't know, if somebody has like the most comprehensive, robust sampler out there that you can think of, I would love to know, but as far as I know, it doesn't exist. So anyways, on the right side, we have this sound, which is a neurobass, and this is something I made. It's part of my Abyss pack that I just put out, but it sounds like this. Kind of things of that nature. I don't think that's actually the right one. I think it's this one, if I'm not mistaken. And unfortunately, the Alckemy, the new Alckemy, I guess, VST or whatever, formerly from Camel Audio, which is now part of Logic, has some really unique features that I'm a little bit envious of. Now you could say, well, why don't you just use Logic Pro for iPad? Well, that user experience sucks. I've tried it many times, and that's why I'm complaining about it. But this is freaking cool because there's a lot of different stuff that you can do with this. So for one, you have these different modes here, which is granular, additive, and spectral. Spectral is my favorite. And the reason why is because if we click on this, maybe it froze. It looks like it froze. There it goes. It caught up. Good job. I'm using my finger to play this. As you can see, like, it just sounds sick. It's a little bit more quiet because we're on the iPad, but it's freaking awesome. One cool thing that you can do with this is you can actually perform and record a motion while you work with this. Once I hit this, and actually record a performance in order for this to play back in a way that makes sense. So check this out. So now, if I were to play a different note, I believe that the performance would still be recorded on here. And now I can change the key. That's so cool. So aside from that, we can clear that out. We also have the trim, which, you know, is kind of very basic. And then we also have different modes here, which is the classic loop. So we can kind of make this move back and forth in between. We have the scrub. Dude, the this is like the coolest freaking thing ever. We also have the bow. And then, of course, we have the arpeggio. Isn't that insane? So this is definitely one of the coolest samplers that I've ever messed with. It's a shame that it's locked behind a subscription, because I would pay a lot of money actually to get something cool like this. And you might be saying, well, it's just granular and you can do some of this stuff within Bitwig, and that's true, but you can't do the additive stuff, and you can't also do the spectral stuff, at least not to my knowledge. It's not the same. So within this, that's that, which is really cool, but obviously this doesn't have any of the slicing features available, which you can utilize within the other sampler that this has. But yeah, as you can tell, like, there's a frustration that I have, because I would like to have kind of like an all-encompassing thing that allows us to do all of these. So we've got two more to cover, and these are just things that kind of are like, yo, if you could put anything inside of a sampler, what would it be? Next, I want to talk about patterning 3, because this is actually more of a sequencer, but it is by far my favorite sequencer I've used for drums. This thing has everything except for chopping loops and reversing for the most part. And then it also has like poor sample management, I would say. It's not even necessarily that it's poor, it just really benefits you if you just take all of your samples and then re-import them into your library, which is kind of annoying. So as you can see, there's all here. If you just open this like this, then you can go and search for your samples and all that. But imagine if this had the same functionality and the same operations as something like Live or as XO. Like, that would be absolutely insane. And then you want to think about, oh, well, imagine if, for drums anyways, if I had something that could import loops and be a slicer that was more than 15 seconds. And then you have something that could be not just for drums. It could, you know, start to do cool things like FM, which this actually does ring modulation. It's not FM, but it's still something. And then you've got access to like a suite of different effects and processing and things that you can do to change things into a wavetable or play back in such a way, you know. I would say that the coolest thing with patterning, though, is that with the sequencing that you have things like offsetting the ticks, which is basically your track delay. Then aside from that, you have nudging both forward and backwards, basically micro timing, if you will, on each step. Then you have probability, you've got your LFOs and your random modulation that you can apply to all of these steps. And this is just an incredibly deep sequencer that has very basic sample functionality. So, you know, you could see why this belongs here, because it's technically a sampler, right? You upload samples into it, you can manipulate basic things with the sample, and then it's more so about the experience of what you do with them. But yeah, it would also be cool, Olympia, Noise Co, if we could just export MIDI off of the jump, that'd be sick too. So future requests. But yeah, like, if we could take all the things that I said and put it into something like this with this apparatus, I would be more than chipper. So finally, one thing that is also worth mentioning with all of this stuff is the Koala sampler. Now, what's so cool about the Koala sampler is that I can just hold a button and then maybe record some stuff. So is this recording? Hopefully it looks like it is. All right, and now what I can do is, what is this? It's a clap. So if I were to take this guy and maybe edit this quickly and just take my favorite bit, so maybe just a part like that and a part like that, then I can move this into this guy and actually mix in, so that way I've combined the sample into itself. Maybe if I took another spot. And what's cool about this is that this actually has a lot of different warp modes. But unfortunately, like, the sequencing experience of it is not that much fun. And then also the effects that it has are okay, but they're not my favorite. But yeah, the sequencer on this is really hard to work with, especially if you're doing like micro timing and stuff. It's just archaic, I guess. But we can mix that in, and you can see that now we've got a complex sample. And what's cool is, like, you can export that. So if you're really big on trying to combine like synthetic drums with, you know, your typical drums or something, then That would be super awesome. My hope for Koala Sampler is to have a blend of this workflow with the sequencing, kind of like patterning. Another honorable mention that I suppose would be good to bring up is Dawn Beat. And what's cool about Dawn Beat is that on each pad, you can actually have AUV effects. So if I go here, I don't quite remember, to be honest, but I think that maybe it's this one. No, that's the delay. If I go menu, and I go pads, you've got some other stuff that you can do. So bricks is also something that's really interesting. It's kind of their answer to what I was just talking about. So for one, you see that there's turn AUV3, but let's talk about bricks first. But this is where you can actually import stuff and take pieces of this, kind of like so, and start to layer them, almost like a timeline. It's just kind of cumbersome to work with though, and it's possible, but just kind of annoying. But if we go here and we go tools, sorry, pads, and maybe we can't use bricks or anything at the same time, perhaps. I don't use this very often, so forgive me if I'm stumbling. But if I go tools, pads, turn AUV3, maybe that one. There we go. Then I can actually apply different things on here that would be, you know, what's it called? That you can actually load like your plugins on these pads, which is kind of neat. And I suppose that you could do that on Bitwig and stuff too, but yeah, it just kind of hits different when you're trying to figure out like this whole like sampler approach and this whole recording thing. And the thing about this with either Ableton or Bitwig is that you have to record into the DAW first. You can't record directly into the sampler itself. So if we go back over to these guys, there's no way to actually just like let this record and then have it process the audio internally. And that means that you have to have another step of like getting something from here and then dragging that in and making that work. So like, yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of quirks within this, and it's not like necessarily the most annoying thing in the world or whatever, but as somebody that spends a lot of time manipulating audio, which I would say even in spite of all of these things, 99% of my audio work is just flipping samples like this and doing some kind of, you know, time stretching or pitching and reversing and manipulating stuff kind of like this, which by the way, Bitwig, it's 2024. There's no excuse why we don't have this for some reason. Come on, just give it to us. It's not that hard. But yeah, I think that the market could really use something like this, especially now with everything coming out of like, you know, I don't know, when Faceplant dropped, I was like ready for the sampler thing. And so far, nobody has done it. Nobody's even really bat an eye over something like that. It's all just been very basic functionality, or they'll pick one function and like really try to focus on that. And my challenge to devs, feel free to consult me, or I will beta test for you. I'd be more than happy to give you all of my ideas, but yeah, we're ready for the super sampler. So what are your thoughts? What are some features that you all would like in this pipe dream of a crazy VST? I would love to know. And yeah, if you all have any questions about any of these plugins that I own or want to see more videos on them, I would love to know. Just maybe check to see if I don't already have videos on them beforehand. Somebody might mention Atlas. Now that I think about it, Atlas I have that can actually do some cool stuff, which Atlas I didn't really talk about because it doesn't really have a whole lot of other significant stuff other than the sequencer, which patterning 3 can do this. But the problem with Atlas 3 is that it doesn't have micro timing built into it. It has shuffle, it has nudging the whole thing, which I believe is somewhere on here. There we go. So you can nudge the entire thing, but you can't move the individual steps back and forth. So I don't ever use this. If I'm going to use something like Atlas, which I use quite a bit actually, more than you think, I just do it in the piano roll. So yeah, anyways, that's my spiel. That's my thing and my hopes to see somebody come out with something like that. Bring me on board. I'd be happy to help you realize that dream, and let's make it happen. Thanks everybody. I appreciate you watching. Be sure to like the video, check out alckemy.com for my sounds and my masterclasses. I just dropped a new one on drums and Bitwig, or book me for a lesson if you want to have a consultation. See you guys.